Great. Thank you, everybody. My name is Stephen Brew. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner. Sorry, I wasn't able to introduce myself earlier. We are now in the second breakout session to discuss additional questions on climate change. And I'm going to start with the first being, what are the 2 or 3 most important issues or concerns related to transportation and land use for Issaquah, and why? And while
David has a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one thing when I think about land use and kind of land use moving forward, I think there's an opportunity to start leveraging the green spaces and the public lands that we have created in Issaquah as carbon sinks, and that increases its value and becomes its own economic engine to continue to preserve the land around us. We saw the city take a bold action with Berksma and investing public money to have that landscape, but it would be wonderful to live in a world that the city saw that as a no-brainer, because they were going to start reaping the benefits of carbon sequestration. So I think that's hard in the sense of thinking about the scope of the city, but definitely something to advocate for, because that's a resource that the city is sitting on.
Okay. Nina has a comment. Sorry.
Yep, go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, here I go again. Okay, so I want to thank you, leverage what David said. I'm in Issaquah Highlands, where 3/4 of the community is open space and parks, and gee, that's great. But that's not the only thing that makes it sustainable. It was built at a time where we wanted to free people from having to use cars and transit in order to have their daily needs. But the most important thing is that Issaquah Highlands was first built in like the 60s, 70s. I know that we have a 150-year long history, but the growth of our neighborhoods happened at a time where people loved cars and they wanted to take their cars to their homes somewhere else, and they didn't want anything else there. Well, I think that's a passe standard. And I want to clarify that I'm not saying just new development have neighborhoods that have a reduced need for cars and transit. I'm saying provide for the existing neighborhoods the things that they need to get them away from the dependency on cars and transit. I mean, right now we're dependent on transit, we're dependent on metro, and Barb pointed this out the other night, that we can't be dependent on metro, because when are they always going to serve? We need to serve ourselves, and I think we can look at zoning and land use in existing neighborhoods to reduce the demand on cars and transit.
Leah has the next comment.
Yeah, I agree with what has been said before. So quickly, just wanted to say I really agree with creating neighborhoods where you don't have to drive. And if you need to get further, then hopefully transit is an option. But for the last resort, then having electric vehicle infrastructure to make sure that for those vehicle miles traveled, they are clean. So I just wanted to emphasize that. And I also wanted to bring up something else that is in the land use purview, and related to dense housing, but also when there are sub-area plans or new developments. I think it is really important, and the city does have the authority in sub-area plans to say that there will be no new gas infrastructure in these areas. So that will help with the green building side as well, but it sort of falls under land use. So I did want to bring it up. That's a pertinent issue, and that's something that's really quite easy for the city to do right now to make a big difference in making sure that we're not locking in fossil fuel infrastructure for the next 50 years as these buildings will remain.
That's the last of the comments that signed up for this meeting.
Great, thank you, guys. Before I move on to the next question, I'm actually going to poke at these responses a little bit, because I think these are really interesting. I think these are great comments on, important issues the city needs to consider. Some of the things that were mentioned in terms of looking at the land use and redesigning the neighborhoods to be more supportive of transit and be more walkable and bikeable areas. Could I get some examples of what that could look like from everybody that's online right now? What do you see specifically kind of changing in the city that would be a little more supportive of these different modes? and as you're gathering your thoughts, one idea that I have is, King County Metro has explored a lot of different types of transit services, particularly with pilot programs in other communities. Do you think, a general support of trying to explore our own pilot programs, consistent with what Councilmember DeMichelle has kind of been talking about, of the city really going beyond what Metro can expand, but maybe looking at something that a city service that we can provide for our
Stephen,
community.
David has a comment, and Steve has a comment.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think like even echoing the thought you were just in, that how can the city be a leader in piloting these things? And then we've also talked about how young people can be kind of the engine of this creativity. Like I could see the city supporting walking bus routes and other things like that to kind of help families see different ways of getting around. I think that's a really interesting idea. I also think that looking at like Taos versus the Highlands as far as a living kind of community versus kind of a community that's set up for that transportation, and how can there continue to be both the stick in the master plans to require building that way, but also incentives for development to have to pay into master transportation plans, so that I've biked through Issaquah, and you will lose kind of bike lanes and lose those things. Like, how do we think of these as kind of complete ecosystems that we're moving through? That's all I wanted to say.
Okay,
Great,
and I apologize. I think Leah had a comment prior to Steve, so.
Go ahead, Leah.
Hey, yeah, I wanted to agree quickly with thing about the bike lanes. I think whenever we're building out transportation infrastructure, we always make sure that cars can get to where they need to go. But that doesn't mean that there's going to be safe infrastructure for people to walk or people to bike. And I also did want to note as well, the last time I was in the Highlands, I don't live there, but I was actually almost hit by a car when I was crossing a crosswalk totally legally at the light, because wider roads encourage cars to go faster, even if the speed limit's posted lower. So I think there's a lot of different design elements that could be incorporated on different, like street narrowing, street slowing, bump outs, that kind of like physical infrastructure that can slow down vehicles, and also wider sidewalks, protected bike lanes that are connected and that get people where they need to go, ample bike parking where stuff is located. I know there's certainly been work along this regard, but there definitely needs to be more, because as Dave said, sometimes if you're riding your bike, stuff comes and goes, and it only takes just one part where there's not a protected bike lane for the whole trip to feel unsafe, especially for certain riders who there's a lot of folks out there that I know who would like to do a 10-minute bike to do their errand instead of jump in their car, and with the time it takes to park, it's not that much quicker, but they're nervous about it because they're not confident riders, and there's not the infrastructure to support that. So I think there's a lot of different design elements that could be brought forward to make it feel safer for folks.
Great,
Okay, Steven, Steve has a comment following Leah.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, I just think we're at a very exciting time right now for the city, as well as opportunities around the country to make a real change here. There's, in terms of transportation, there's some terrific work being done in different parts of the country on, for lack of a better word, a lot of it is called multimodal transportation planning, but some of it is very adaptable to current streets. It's not just new street design. So there's terrific opportunities there that I'm sure some of you are aware of, but we would, as a volunteer group, enjoy sort of supporting that. And then we also have this terrific opportunity of Title 18 coming up, and there's so many available tools within land use to help incentivize with, it can be both carrots and sticks, but there's lots of opportunity to hit certain goals in terms of decreasing our carbon footprint, and doing that in a way where, the trade-offs could be increased FAR or increased density, as long as we hit certain benchmarks, or developers do. And then anyway, I'm just really excited that Issaquah has this opportunity in time right now. And I'm hoping we can galvanize the support we need here.
Great, thank you, Steve. Gus, is
Hey,
there any
Steve?
more?
Yes, we have two additional comments. One from Peter. Peter, you want me to just read that you said that grocery stores, we need to have a grocery store downtown? Did you have anything additional? Okay, great. And Nina had seconded that, and she said, yes, Peter, that's a great idea. And I would like a grocery store. And then Councilmember Michelle had a comment. So.
Yeah, I 3 on the downtown grocery store. Just a couple of comments. Of course, we've been hearing this terrible news coming out of Metro and Sound Transit, and they're reducing, and they have reduced transit here. And but I picked up a little notice from the Snoqualmie Valley Transportation Group that has the little buses that go around out there. They're actually increasing their service, and I'm sure they are, because I'm sure with the reduction in Metro service that their demand has probably gone up. And so I'm wondering if we could talk to them and find out what kind of funding models that they're using and their successes. And that transportation model has been a long time growing. That's a 20-year project. So we need to know the ups and the downs that they've gone through in order to get it to the healthy place that it is today. And then the other thing I want to point out, Nina, I ran across a bulletin that you put out from the Issaquah connections, I think in the last, maybe it was certainly pre-COVID, but it showed personal stories about how people were using transit, using walking, using bikes. Excellent, excellent piece. And we need to have more of that, more community information, education on how to use alternatives. And so, and in that process, Nina is a great resource. That was just an excellent piece. So I think so often people don't, Nina got at it in one of the stories in there. People are, if they've never used transit, they're intimidated. If they've never walked someplace and don't know how they're going to get back, they're intimidated. And so they just stick to the car because that's what they know best. And so we have to start telling people stories about how they access other modes of transportation. So those are my 2 comments.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Davis. I think, that last point you made is, oh, I'm sorry, Gus, is there another comment?
There's 2 more comments, one from Nina and then another one from David. I apologize, Stephen, please.
Okay, but Nina, before we get to you, I'm just going to comment on Councilmember Michelle's point, because I think it's important to note that a lot of, one of the major barriers that people have is kind of that fear of using something you've never used before. And in transportation programs I've managed before, I used to actually organize with Metro just to bring a bus out to, the city hall, just so people can walk on and practice using an Orca card, because that was one of the things that people have never done before when they've never run transit. They have no idea how to pay for it. They think they have cash, and they think that's a burden for them because no one uses cash anymore. And so just thinking about those small things, and I think this volunteer program would be great for something like this, even coordinated with the city and King County Metro. And the last thing I want to say is the idea behind moving towards multimodal. For those who haven't seen it, the city is developing a mobility master plan, which is pushing the city to incorporate more multimodal transportation into the services and the infrastructure that we put in the city. If you haven't commented on it, please do. For those who have commented it, I am working with Megan Kirsten Murphy to upgrade the language around climate change. So your comments have been heard, and so we are working on that section. And now I will go to Nina for your comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Barb. I have to say that, I work with a team of really great people in Issaquah Highlands, and that's how we were able to produce We Have Options, which was that piece, which was really fun. And the City of Issaquah was a partner with us on that too. We worked with the Sustainability Office. So that took a lot of people, and that is some content that could be evergreen. So if the city wants to rerun that kind of stuff and freshen up the stories, we could do it. I also wanted to point out, somebody earlier had said about very localized transportation options. And I think, Barb, you talked about them too, that are outside that regional transportation that Sound Transit and Metro tend to focus on, especially in a declining budget. Issaquah Highlands is exploring having their own shuttle in Issaquah Highlands, serving in a circular way to get people to those central things. You know, we're talking about the central Issaquah plan and centralizing everything. Well, you have to get around where you are too. And so the people who have talked about having, Stephen did too, having very highly micro-local transportation options would be just awesome. They don't have to be big. They just have to be frequent and flexible. And that's all I wanted to say right there.
Okay, Stephen, we have David next.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I guess just a quick anecdote to kind of reinforce that micro transportation idea. I work with a lot of students in the Sammamish area that are first generation Americans, and they're like don't always have families access to cars, or that's not necessarily the mode because that's not what their parents have grown up on. And I could think of like how you could build a system that encouraged high schoolers to move around your community, and that would be the starting point of use. You know, they would be all about trying those things, and then they would encourage their family to do it. Thinking about people getting to community centers, people getting to jobs, I think it's so cool to give them the infrastructure to start that and really have that as that pilot. And I'm sure there's grant money to go pursue that.
Thank you, David. And I'm gonna add on and agree with you on all that. In my discussions with the Youth Advisory Board on topics like this, they are more than enthusiastic about trying any type of pilot programs because they feel like their only option is to drive around. And then the majority who I talk to, they don't want to drive around because they recognize the high costs of having to maintain car ownership, let alone to get your license, drive. But you know, the original idea behind the car was the youth were able to access information. Now they have cell phones for all that. You don't need a car to access information, connect with your friends. So accessing different parts of the community, I think it would be great for the youth to be able to pilot for us. Gus, was there another comment?
Yes, we have three. We have three additional comments. We have Kay has a comment, Leah has a comment, Anne has a comment, and if possible, I'd like to make a comment at the end. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Kay.
Oh, okay, I did it wrong. Okay, so I'm going to say something that I can just imagine the groans already from all of you, but I want to just raise it. I want to put it out there. I think in the future there might be developed alternative sources of transportation like golf carts. And I think that it's a possibility that in the future we won't have two cars if we're a two-car family. We'll have one car and one really small cart of some kind, which you could just take if there were indeed services near your neighborhood. And there are neighborhoods already that would really lend themselves to that. I mean, our downtown already, but you need to have it safe. I know that they may be outlawed here. I think in a lot of communities they're actually outlawed, except in Florida. And so it would be a code thing, and it would have to be part of a whole infrastructure emphasis, not just sort of letting somebody suddenly, take to the streets with their golf carts. It would have to, So anyway.
Great, thank you, Kay. Leah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, my only comment was just sort of emphasizing that I agree. Being able to test things is important, and I personally was really nervous to bring my bike to the bus for the first time. So I went with a friend, but having to put it on the rack really intimidated me. So just something, just to echo the earlier comment and provide a personal anecdote there. And I think it goes for walking and it goes for biking, it goes for directions. So it would be useful if as we build out the sustainable infrastructure, providing the resources for people to feel secure about trying it for the first time.
No, I think that's a great comment. Thank you. And then, Gus,
next.
Did you say there was one more comment?
And
go ahead.
There's a comment.
I just have a quick thing. When I heard you, Stephen, say that you were working with Megan about the transportation mobility, the plan and all, I was really heartened because it goes back to that collaboration and the city departments collaborating with each other more and more as we look at a whole big picture that everything affects everything else. And I love that. And I want to say that's great, and all the departments working together, and that these topics, that we need to continue these discussions, not only within the city, but in the community like we're doing now, by having some additional periodic roundtables or forums or whatever to keep these ideas going and get more people to know what's going on and involved. That's it.
Great, thank you, Ann. Gus, go ahead, and then I'm gonna move to the next question.
So I've personally always been passionate about environment. I'm glad that I'm helping host this. So something to be shared that I think is something to consider is the community transit model that currently doesn't exist. You know, Seattle had this, 100 years ago, and it just kind of disappeared. But a city-hosted community transit where people can just call the service and have it available, and so you don't have to have a car. And it's a service that currently is being, I think, tested in some Amish for folks, and it actually is working because they call a ride and then it takes them there, and then they can pick somebody else up. It truly reduces the total number of cars on the road, especially during the day or in the afternoon. So it's just, I think somebody else has shared that. I think that's something we need to consider as a city, and we're not depending on Metro to, bring a bus at a certain schedule. It could be on call based, and it could increase and decrease the use based on the times of the day. So that's something that city can look at, and we have a fleet service. So it's, or use a third party. We have police cars, so it's not like that service is not currently there. We just would have to add cost and need to understand the cost of it. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Gus. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next question. What kinds of things could be done to overcome potential barriers and make progress on this topic? I know we've actually already started talking about that, but specifically looking at the types of barriers we have for both transportation and land use, can people elaborate a little bit more on that?
I'm just waiting for folks to sign up for comments.
Okay, so to help kind of people think a little bit more, what kind of barriers have you seen in your work? Something maybe you've had control over. In my line of work, I have control over access to Orca cards. I have control over where King County Metro campaigns to let community members know where they can access different services, but also identify different services that they didn't even know were available. Maybe we can look at those type of barriers for now, things that maybe you have more direct experience with.
Nina has a comment.
Yeah, Nina, go ahead.
But I'm asking in the chat box for somebody else to speak, so please do. Well, one of the barriers that we have is that the neighborhoods don't want to change. These are really lovely single-family neighborhoods that have a look and feel, and we're very protective about them, and I agree with that 100%. But we have land use tables that we could use in a very strict application that would allow more freedom in single-family neighborhoods to have the uses that they need for, say, daily uses, or things that are getting them too often in their cars, or need for transit to leave their neighborhood. Because as I said, the developments of the time of the 60s and 70s loved having to drive home in their neighborhood off in Squawk Mountain or out in South Cove. That's great, but we haven't given them the flexibility to have something that's compatible with their neighborhood. So the barrier would be, don't change my neighborhood. And the way to get over that is only change it a little bit to serve this particular need.
Great, thank you, Nina. Are there any other comments on this one?
At this point, Steve has a comment. Yes.
I was just going to echo what was just discussed. There's some opportunities as we revisit the land use code to, relook at mixtures of uses in the area. A lot of times people are starting to adopt what they call form-based code, which really is looking at kind of the form and appearance you want rather than defining by usage. And I think the city, again, has this terrific opportunity to help out by its revision of the land use code. So.
Great. Thank you, Steve. You know, one barrier I can think of just off the top of my head is access to transportation services in terms of affordability. I know this is going a little bit beyond climate change, but there are huge barriers for people to own a car, let alone to operate and use one regularly, but also to get access to transit worker cards and transit bus passes. As some of you may already know, we're limited in the number of places we can get an Orca card pass. And if you don't have internet or access to the internet, it's very difficult to get one in person. And that's one thing that I know King County Metro and Sound Transit has been really pushing on trying to expand, is to get more transit ridership, trying to increase that access. But maybe there's other ideas beyond just adding it to grocery stores, which I agree with everybody that one is definitely needed in downtown. But maybe there's other areas where Orca card or transit passes should be accessible.
Stephen, Peter, and Kay have a comment.
Okay, Peter and Kay, go ahead, and then we'll move on to the last question.
Yeah, we just, our town is just, everything funnels right down into our downtown, of all the people coming along the Issaquah Hobart Road and from Highway 18. And so we need to be working with other communities to change commuting and how it works.
And Fletcher has a comment. And Mary Lou, Mary Polly has a comment as well.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention that I'm trying to think what it was. I'm taking notes and trying to keep my I did have an idea about communications. I think communications is a barrier, and it hasn't been mentioned yet. And that is, how do you get the word out? Is there a way the city can do more with communications? Is there some way we can make universal access to technology and do some campaign so that people sign up to get the newsletters and the information so that they know what's available? I think that we have to make things available and accessible, but people have to know, and they don't know. So I would think that's a huge area, is the area of communications to overcome. And I think there are ways that the city could we could work on that with different kinds of campaigns. I'm done.
So this is Mary Lou. I was actually just going to let Peter give me a call if he wanted to, because it's such a big topic, but your city is already involved with all of the cities around 18 and Issaquah Hobart Road in a coalition trying to get the completion of Highway 18 so that those that are south of 18, those communities can access Seattle either via a completed safe highway that is lit and divided and feels like a good way to get to where you're going. And then I'm also trying to convince them to join within the transit taxing jurisdiction. Right now, they currently don't pay taxes for services like, Barb, is Barb not on this one? Barb's not on this one. And so, Barb is on this one. So it's going to be hard to convince Metro and Sound Transit and others to talk about park and ride structures to cut that traffic off, because they're not actually in the taxing jurisdiction. So that's something I mention frequently at the state level and at the regional level. So we have a few irons in the fire, but that would be huge if we could really, stop the pass-through traffic. And I'm looking at Larry, because I know Larry lives down that road, and it's not meant to stop what I call the soft outer edges of Issaquah coming into town to do what they need to do. Because they've been doing that for 50 years. It's really to stop the new traffic counts, that cars that have added in the last 20 years coming from south of 18 and not using 18 to get to where they want to go. That's really the goal here. Thanks.
Great. Thank
We
you.
have one last comment from Leah.
Okay, Leah, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess one thing that has never been shared is just a resistance to change and a resistance to like the status quo is what it is, and we're used to relying on cars, and it's hard to imagine the alternatives. So, I sort of I was thinking about the stories that Nina wrote. I think from a communications perspective, also to sort of back up what Anne was saying, I think it's really important to showcase the possibilities and the benefits while making these changes. But I also do think that the city does need to be bold and understand that people are a little bit resistant to change if they don't know for sure that it's going to be better. So I do think just having bold action is really important. And sort of to my earlier comment about the sub-area plans and making sure that we're not locking in new fossil fuel use. I think it's a similar thing, right? It's like, well, it's another thing to add to the list, but it's a really important thing, and it's something that we can do. So I think just having the courage, and then I didn't answer earlier because we ran out of time, but from Climate Solutions perspective on like how can we help and like how can we knock down these barriers as an organization, we're happy to coordinate with other local grassroots groups on supporting these changes and providing grassroots comments to council members and to city leaders who work on media. Happy to help with research and policy making. We're really excited about all the possibilities that are out there, but we just need to take the steps and actually like start doing things immediately.
Even at this point, we have everybody else has joined the main meeting. So,
okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll go back to the main meeting now.